Welcome, everyone, to Let's Talk Real Estate Investing. In this series, I speak to real estate investors and real estate investing specialists about their experience in real estate investing, about any of their lessons learned, any tips, tell us a bit about their strategy, etc., so that we can learn from each other. Each of us are unique, and each of us will create our strategy that's unique to us. But it's always helpful to hear what other people are doing, so we're not recreating the wheel. So we can take a little from this person, a little from that person, and there's so many great tips here from other people, because even for experienced real estate investors, if you haven't done a specific strategy, or maybe someone's doing the same strategy as you, but they're doing it a little bit different, learning about what they're doing can help you enhance your strategy. My name is Debbie Balfour, and I'm a real estate investor, and I'm a real estate investing success coach. I help my clients create their personalized real estate investing strategy, create that strategy that's unique to you, and scale efficiently by building in processes and tools so that you can start enjoying financial freedom and time freedom, which we're all doing. Our financial freedom is to give us back time in our lives. So I'm really excited to introduce my special guest today. I'm really honored to have her. Her name is Serena Holmes, and Serena is a licensed realtor, a real estate investor. She's also an author of the book, The Accidental Entrepreneur. She's the host of Inspired to Invest podcast and a former CEO of Tigress Events, multi-award winning brand experience agency that she ran for 18 years. So I feel like I have a celebrity here that I'm speaking to. And today, our topic with Serena will be focused on private lending. But before we get into talking about her experience with private lending, I'd like Serena for you to introduce yourself a bit more and about your journey in real estate investing.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks for having me on today. I think there's obviously a lot happening in our industry, and I think it's helpful to look back at some of those lessons and things that have occurred to hopefully make sure that it's, giving people a better shot at success as they move forward into this space. But for me, I had my own business for many years, and I think I was about 8 years in when I hired my first business coach. And one of the biggest takeaways from her was really just to put some of the retained earnings in my business to use. So that's really how the real estate investing outside of my primary residence got started. And I actually bought a short-term rental in Florida, of all things, but it was when the dollar was at par. So it was kind of a perfect opportunity to take advantage of what feels like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Maybe we'll see it again one day. But I was able to buy something, fairly affordable, and then also in the dollar was par. So I held on to that for 4 years, sold it, and then I was like, now what do I do? And again, hindsight is 2020. I wish I knew then what I know now, because I probably would have shifted into multifamily at that point in time. But I ended up staffing some events for a real estate education company that we all, I think, fairly well. But they were looking for scalable staffing support in Texas and Florida, and it just put them on my radar. So I went to one of their events and went into their 3-day event, led into their membership and their investor summit. So that's really where I started to broaden my horizons and bought a couple more pre-construction properties, invested in some syndicated mortgages, land development, and then a friend introduced me to the concept of private lending. So that really became my bread and butter for, quite a number of years. About 5.5 years, I did 60 deals, and everything was flawless. Like everything was paid on time or early, never a hitch. And then in the last year, it's like the whole world exploded. So that's kind of where we are right now. So we're kind of in, damage control and recovery mode at this point in time. But yeah, there's been lots and lots of learnings and lessons in the last 6 to 8 months.
Well, before we get into the world exploding and why that happened and what's happening there, something that I'm interested in is that you're a licensed realtor, and I think in one of our other conversations that we've had together, offline, is that the surprise that so many like realtors that have access to all these to seeing like properties right
Yeah.
before anybody else does, that we're all like, as real estate investors, we're like, we want off market properties, we would like to get our hands on properties first. So a lot of these realtors don't invest. Why do you
Yeah.
think so?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I find it completely ironic. It doesn't mean that none of them do. Like, I think some
Yeah,
of them belong towards it, but they're so focused on transacting and bringing in the commission and things like that, that, I guess it all depends if they have enough money left over in lump sums in order to put into something like that. But I think it
mhm,
is really just a mindset shift and just kind of meeting the right connections. Like prior to 6 years ago, I never really fathomed the idea of raising money from investors to acquire properties. And there's all these different strategies that you can incorporate that don't mean you have to use your own money, right?
right.
But yeah, it's something that I find really unusual, I guess you could say. And it's something that really caught my attention with some of the realtors that do talk about it more openly, just because they seem to be so rare. So,
Yeah, I'm surprised there aren't more realtors involved, like that's doing real estate investing. And maybe it is, like you said, it's a knowledge gap there for them that because I think before we got into real estate investing, when I talked to other people too, I thought I was unique. I always thought that you had to be rich to invest in real estate, right?
yeah.
You had to have savings to invest in real estate. And when you have kids, you have no savings,
Well, and
right?
you also think about the fact, like, you think, well, are you just buying a single family home and being a landlord? I think that's for someone that doesn't have the knowledge that we have,
Mhm.
that's just the only way that you kind of look at it. And there are other things that have become more popular now, like short-term rentals and mid-term rentals and even arbitrage methods and stuff like that, that are just becoming more mainstream for the people that are looking for that information. But it
Yeah.
wasn't something that most people maybe thought about in that way prior to maybe like 5 or even 10 years ago.
Well, I think it's also the, social media. It has made information so much more accessible that
Yeah,
we didn't have. I know, yeah. I wish I knew too, like you, what I know now.
yeah, yeah,
I found out about real estate investing later in life, and but I guess that we just didn't have the means to find that information
yeah,
at the
yeah,
time. So yeah, that's true. So okay, let's talk about our topic on private lending and
yeah,
tell me a bit about, I know I don't want us to disclose any about who and what or anything like that, but you have been doing a lot of private lending and it's been difficult recently. So let's talk about what the world has exploded recently and what is that looking like? Like
yeah.
what's
Yeah,
happening
I
out
mean, I
there?
guess, my first taste of it was really with a few syndicated mortgages that were kind of heavily advocated, let's say that, at the first investor summit that I went to, where the consultant I was working with had said, you could use your HELOC and invest in these syndicated mortgages. And back then, we're paying only 3% on the borrowed money. And you're coming in as a first position syndicated mortgage holder. So it was fairly secure, I guess, maybe compared to some other methods of private lending. And at the time, it was set up where it was split, where you could get anywhere from 14 to 16% interest, but it was split where you got half of it upfront monthly, and then the rest was a deferred interest payment that would accrue until the end. And these were all based on shorter terms, like 12, 18, and 24 months, with the option to extend for 6 months twice. And I did receive a payout on one and a half of those, but we just passed 6 years and I'm still stuck in one and a half of them. So, I've been trying to see like what the options are in a situation like that, because, it just has gone on for so much longer than expected. And at this point, like, I would like to exit from it. But through that opportunity and experience, I had a friend that introduced me to someone that was a close family friend of hers. And she was doing private lending with him, and it was not necessarily for real estate investors. It was for people that, maybe they had to wipe their line of credit clean to close on a mortgage. So it could be something like a 6 week amount of time, 2 weeks. There were some that were more principal and interest based, like business loans that could go on for 12 months or a year or something like that. But they would typically pay either a flat rate on the amount. So for example, I think one was $35,000 and they paid 5,000 on that for 6 weeks to kind
Mhm.
of clear their line of credit. One was kind of, I think, 2,000 on 20,000. One was, I think, 20% annualized interest over a 2 year period of time. So they all were like very, very wide ranging. And initially I started out knowing like they're unsecured. I'll start with $100,000 and kind of split it up between a few different borrowers and stuff like that. And even though they were unsecured, there was always still a property that was listed that I would check to make sure that they own the property. And it was kind of written in such a way that if there was ever an event of a default, that I could put a lien on the property.
Right.
So even though, yes, it's not on title or anything like that, I knew that there was still some level of recourse in a way. And I started working with him in 2018, maybe did 2 or 3 deals a year for the first few years. I think over the 5.5 years did about 25 deals in total. And like I said, everything was always on time or early. And then it's really just been in this last year. I had a borrower that I'd worked with in the past that I ran into some issues with, and now that's kind of going through the process of litigation. So that was kind of my first wrinkle, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we got later in the year, there was some other more real estate investor focused companies that had paused payments due to different reasons, like CMHC had changed the rules, so they expected to go in and refinance, pay out there's their lenders and their mortgages and stuff like that, and then that caused a lot of havoc in some ways. And then there was also another instance with a brokerage I was working with, and there's a lot of layers to that onion. But essentially, I think what is the common thread for all of those real estate investors is I think they were just raising money the wrong way. Like a lot of them were raising money for down payments and closing costs and renovations all on debt rather than equity. And in some instances, they should have been raising on like joint ventures or equity based so that they didn't have that pressure to meet those monthly debt obligations and things like that.
Right.
So I think that's what, led to a lot of these things. And the problem is it's very normalized, like in our community. Like you could do several deals a day if you really wanted to, right? And the reality is like the way that some deals were also presented to us was really inaccurate. So we could be told, they need $50,000 for a renovation after the refi in 6 to 12 months. This will be the after repair value. This is how it will be paid out. And we're discovering in some instances there's 10 to 20 P notes on a property. So it's literally like tripling or quadrupling the actual value of the property. But that's really the problem with having these unsecured promissory notes, is that nothing is registered. So nobody knows about each other,
Exactly. There is no way to pull
track
title
that.
or anything like that to
Yeah.
see.
So the amount
Yeah.
of debt is not clear. So I mean, there are a lot of things looking back now. It's like, you think if you're working with someone that's brokering, like obviously you would expect the information to be provided to you accurately and honestly. So, that's obviously proven to not be the case in some instances. And, there's just a lot of things I think across the board that were not sustainable for people. When mortgage rates started to go up, CMHC changed the rules, now they're changing them back. And, I think that created issues for people that maybe didn't intend to create any harm to people. Like they weren't trying to be fraudulent, but
Yes.
some have just been, grappling with the circumstances. So I think it's been on both ends of the spectrum, like where some is like, there's no way to slice it other than fraud. Or in other cases, maybe they just didn't know what they didn't know. They raised money the wrong way, but then it kind of leads to that whole thing right now. A lot of them are trying to flip their investors from debt to equity, but that just doesn't work for some people. Like if people went in carrying this money on their HELOCs or something, like to say, well, you'll be paid back 2 to 3 years from now, like that might not be possible for some people, right? So I really don't think that's a reasonable solution. Like I think that those particular companies should be trying to find equity-based investors to replace the debt that people have come in on.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, a lot of people that do private lending, they're doing it for cash flow.
Yep.
Right, and yes, exactly, you can't, if so it's something I think one of those lessons learned and due diligence is that if you are using your HELOC, then, you need to have a way, it's one of those risk management things now that we need
Yeah.
to think about. If they can't pay you back,
Yeah.
in a timely manner, or they can't make the monthly payment, how
Yeah.
are you going to come up with
The
that
difference. I
amount?
mean, for
Yeah.
me, I really thought that, if I have 20 different deals going on, if one or two go sideways, like I have so many other deals that it'll more than cover it.
Mhm.
But the way that things are sitting now, it's like 75% of those have all kind of gone sideways,
Wow.
right? So
Yeah.
I'm lucky that some of it was in cash, some of it was on a HELOC. So like the few that I have are kind of covering that debt. But there are people I know that were 100% on their HELOC. So
HELOC,
they
yeah.
don't have that money coming in now. They have this high debt. Some people have been losing their homes. Like there's other pretty serious circumstances and collateral damage from all of this stuff that's happened, right? So I think that's um, really scary, but nobody would have expected things to spiral to this magnitude, right? Like just how
Mhm.
many people have been affected. So I think nobody was really prepared for that.
Right. So how would you, if we were to go through from your experience now with private lending,
Yeah.
for people to say, is this right for me? What would you say are the pros to private lending? And then we'll talk about the cons. What are some of those
Yeah.
pros?
Yeah. I mean, I think, for a long time it was great. Like it was one of those things where I'm like, I don't even have to work anymore. Like if it remained that steady, like it was really, I think I tripled my income or more, and I was making a lot more than I even needed. So I just continue to pay down, my HELOC. And then as that paid down, I'd do like more opportunities and stuff like that. Right. And I
Mhm.
think naively, even though I knew that things were unsecured, because there was always properties that were listed, that's where I kind of thought there is that recourse, not knowing there could be so many more people on the same thing. So what I kind of learned is that the P notes are actually held with the corporation, not the properties. So it's not like you're a mortgage holder where, your world is just that one property, right? Like it's really the
Mhm.
corporation that is responsible to you, not the property. So even if it sells, like that doesn't really matter. So learning some of those things, I think now looking at it, I don't think I'd ever touch something that wasn't secured in either first or maybe second position, but probably only with someone that's not a real estate investor. And it's just like, maybe their primary residence, and understanding your options to maybe take over their payments as a first if they did start to default so you don't lose your position. But I just didn't have some of those relationships prior to the last 12 to 18 months. And now I know some
Mhm.
mortgage brokers that do that. But even for people that have those private firsts, like just doing that additional due diligence, doing your own appraisals, having your own lawyers, like, making sure that you are represented and being looked out for appropriately so that you know exactly what you're walking into, and there's no possibility you're lending on something that isn't worth the mortgage or is condemned.
Yeah,
There's a lot of different things that people are dealing with, even if they did come in on it first.
right. Yeah. Not, yeah, exactly. Like, okay, I hold a mortgage, but I don't actually know what this property looks like or where it's located or,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So, I think that we can't control the things that others do. Like we have no control when we're doing private lending
yeah,
and I think that's one of the cons of it, is that if you, as an active investor, you've
yeah,
got total control. It's your stuff. If
for
you
sure.
mess up, it's it's your own fault, right?
Yeah,
But when you're private lending, the whole idea of I'm making money while I sleep, well, somebody else, it's because you've just relinquished
yeah.
control to that.
Yeah,
So
and I think there's different ways to look at it. Like, I mean, if you were to go joint venture with someone where you're 50% on title with the property, you're the money partner, you're clear about your exit strategies and things like that. So I think you have far more control in a situation like that where you're one to one, or even maybe one of a few, not hundreds, but I mean like 3 to 5.
mhm.
Like I think that's a very different situation to be in. But even for people that come in as like a limited partner, if you are one of 100, there's still very little control in a
Mhm.
situation like that. So I guess it depends on like what you need in order to sleep at night and stuff like that. I think, for a lot of people, even though yes, we knew it was unsecured, there's a level of risk. Like a lot of us thought by diversifying so much that we would be protected. And
Yes.
yet here we are in a situation like we've been facing. And, there's a lot of things that have happened where people have gone insolvent, and there's bankruptcies and people are literally losing like their life savings and stuff like that, right? So I think for some of those companies, again, maybe they didn't intend to create any problems for people or damage, but in some cases they just scaled too quickly, right? So they acquired so many properties that the actual work wasn't being done. So then there's vacancies, the refis are not happening, and it compounds all these different issues. And I mean, there's a lot wrapped up in some of those particular instances, but
Yes.
I think how they're raising money is one of the big issues. Scaling too fast is another issue, not having the right business systems, mixing personal and professional expenses. There's a lot of things that are all mixed in. And then when you have, uh, situations that aren't being presented accurately and honestly, then that just is the icing on the cake.
Yeah. So what are some of the, like, if you look back at things now, what are some of the things that, like the due diligence steps that, you thought you were doing, these, like you thought you were doing due diligence, and like you
Yeah.
said, you thought by diversifying to, what are some of the things that you would do differently? What are you adding to your due diligence list now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for one, I would admit that I did get a little bit too comfortable, that, I did so many deals that went really well that as you start to see them, a lot of them are written the same way, right? So I think even if you think it's written the same way, it's still a good idea to have a lawyer put eyes on it, because even one word difference can really make a big difference in terms of what can happen. I have now hired a number of lawyers in the last year. Like I think I'm up to like 6 or 7. So it's kind of crazy just going through all of that. But what's frustrating is like I've learned things that were in the agreement that I had looked over 6 years ago. And I'm learning now that they never should have been written that way in some respects. And for that reason, like the deals I saw afterwards never raised any concerns, because the lawyer that looked over, my first few deals, they're all kind of written the same. So I think that was a real big eye opener, that maybe I would have perceived things different if a different lawyer had looked it over and raised concerns over some of the language. So that's one thing. Even if you get one lawyer to look it over, maybe even get two just for a second
Right.
opinion. I do think it's, people who have nothing to hide nothing. I think it's good practice to ask to see the financials of the company, just to kind of see what their books look like, see what kind of, what their debt load looks like, and just kind of see where they stand. Are they just raising money to pay interest, or are they actually healthy? I think a company that is doing things right should have no problem sharing their financials with you, and just how their communication is and things like that. Understanding like what is their exit strategy. So if they put a 3-month term or 6 months, like how do they actually plan to pay people out and things like that. But I think even if they seem like they're giving you some of those answers the right way, I think there's probably a very slim chance that I would do anything unsecured going forward, just based on everything that's happened. Like,
Right.
I think there's still ways that you can make money coming in as like a first position mortgage holder or on a joint venture or something like that. But I think um, there's just too many unknowns with the fact that P-note holders and unsecured lenders are just not registered anywhere. So there's just really no way to know like how many of you are there.
Right.
So
Yeah. And even, I mean, I think for like, even with limited partnerships, we're finding that although it's like the limited partnership is on title for the land, how the business is being run, and the cost is accumulated,
mhm,
sometimes even selling that land now
may not be
isn't,
worth it.
is still, is still in a negative position.
Yeah, I mean, I had dinner with a couple of real estate lawyers last week or 2 weeks ago that are focused on real estate investing, and they actually said in their opinion, um, coming in as an equity investor is actually by no means safer. In fact, it's not, than being in a debt position, because at least if you are in a debt position, it's clear like this money is owed to you. Where in equity, there's actually no obligation from the active partner to repay you.
Right.
So even though people might feel like, it feels more secure, like there's a lot more paperwork, coming in at a certain position. But in their opinion, it was not necessarily a better place to be.